in the sun-warmed plains of ancient Mali, where tall savanna grasses swayed like golden waves beneath the gentle breath of the wind. A baby girl named Naira was born at the exact moment the first sunbeam of dawn touched the earth, and elders believed such timing meant the child carried the spirit of the sunrise itself, a blessing rarely bestowed upon mortals. As she grew, the villagers witnessed her extraordinary beauty, which seemed crafted with divine precision, smooth bronze skin that glowed in the light, eyes shining like polished amber, and hair braided with the effortless grace of river reeds. But beyond her looks, she possessed a mind sharp enough to memorize long ancestral stories, solve village disputes, and impress even the most respected griots who guarded the sacred histories of their people. Yet beauty and talent often walk hand in hand with unforeseen dangers, and lurking in Naira's shadow was her cousin, Fumani, a girl who shared her household but not her fortune, a girl whose heart harbored a silent storm of jealousy each time Niara received praise, gifts, or admiration that she felt should be hers. Fumani, though not unkind by nature, had grown tired of living in the dim glow of Niara's radiance. For every compliment directed at Naira felt like a reminder of her own inadequacies, and deeper than jealousy, she feared being forgotten, overshadowed, or left behind as Naira's destiny climbed higher each passing year. When Naira was chosen by the village elders to attend the legendary festival of masks, a sacred event reserved for only the most promising youth whose spirits harmonized with the ancestors, Fumani's resentment solidified into something darker as she watched the village celebrate Niera with drums, chants, and offerings while she stood at the edge of the crowd feeling invisible. Despite warnings from her grandmother, who said that envy is a snake that bites the one who nurtures it first, Niera trusted everyone around her, including Fumani, believing that her own kindness protected her from all harm. Yet destiny had already begun weaving a different path for her. As the day of the festival approached, the sky itself seemed unsettled, with winds that whispered warnings through the old baobab trees and birds that took flight to Curly as though escaping an unseen disturbance. But Naira remained blissfully unaware, packing her ceremonial beads and embroidered cloth with the excitement of a girl stepping into the first chapter of her great future, while Fumani watched silently from the doorway, her eyes filled with unspoken bitterness that neither Naira nor the elders noticed. On the morning of departure, when the drums called the chosen youth forward, Naira's grandmother placed her hands on her shoulders and said, "Child, your beauty is a blessing, but blessings cast shadows. Walk carefully." Yet even these words did not fully prepare Niara for the hidden danger growing inside the heart of the one person she trusted most. For jealousy, once rooted, becomes a force stronger than reason, heavier than regret, and darker than night itself. And as Naira walked toward the sacred grounds of the festival, unaware of the storm following her in silence, the spirits of the land watched with worry, knowing that the greatest battles are often waged not against enemies outside, but against envy lurking inside the hearts of those we love the most. As Naira arrived at the grand festival of masks, she felt the ground vibrate beneath her feet as rows of drummers pounded, rhythms that echoed across the savannah like thunder, announcing the presence of ancient spirits. and the air was filled with swirling red dust, incense, smoke, and the vibrant sounds of flutes carved from reed. The festival grounds were alive with dancers moving in circles, each wearing hand-carved wooden masks representing ancestors of rain, fire, wisdom, fertility, and war. And Nyera, draped in shimmering cloth dyed with desert saffron, walked with graceful steps that made the elders whisper that the sunrise itself flowed through her veins. She clutched the sacred dawn mask chosen for her exquisite piece, carved from Iroko wood with bone-white patterns, polished shells around the edges, and a center stripe of gold dust that glowed. The crowd fell silent for a brief breath, awed by how naturally the mask seemed to belong to her, as though she had been born for this very ritual. But in the shadows, behind the stands of woven mats and clay pots filled with offerings, Fumani watched Nyera with eyes full of simmering bitterness. Having followed her secretly from the village with the determination of a hunter stalking prey, and each cheer, each praise, each admiring gaze directed at Nyera tightened the knot of jealousy in her chest until it felt like a burning coal pressed under her ribs. When Nyera stepped onto the center stage to perform the sacred dawn dancer ritual meant to honor the first light that guided their ancestors through wars and migrations, the drums quickened, and the earth itself seemed to hum beneath her feet as she moved with elegance that made even the seasoned dancers pause, confident that she was witnessing her destiny unfold with the blessing of the spirits. Yet she had no idea that Fumani had already planned a darkness to counter her rising light. Earlier that afternoon, in a hidden corner beneath a giant baobab tree, Fumani had knelt before a small leather pouch containing a forbidden charm given to her years ago by a wandering spirit talker who warned her never to use it unless she was prepared to carry the weight of its consequences. And with trembling hands she tied a black string around it, whispering desperate words, asking the spirits to take Nyera's beauty, her grace, her rising success, and scatter them like ash in the wind. She dug a shallow hole at the tree's roots, placed the charm inside, and pressed the soil hard with her palm, feeling an unsettling chill run across her skin as though invisible fingers had brushed against her spine, sealing the curse into the land itself. As dusk colored the sky in hues of deep purple and gold, Nyera finished her dance, bowing before the elders as the crowd erupted in applause. But just as she stepped back, she felt a momentary weakness rush through her body. Her vision blurred at the edges, and her heart skipped in a strange, heavy way. Yet she convinced herself that it was nothing more than exhaustion and the overwhelming excitement of performing before such a massive gathering. The elders approached her with smiles, placing a garland of desert flowers around her neck and telling her that her future would shine brighter than any dawn. But as their joyful voices rose, a cold gust of wind swept across the festival grounds, rustling the masks and extinguishing several torches, causing people to exchange uneasy looks. And somewhere in the crowd, Fumani smirked faintly, believing the spirits had accepted her offering. When night fell, the festival transformed into a glowing sea of lanterns. Drums softened into rhythmic heartbeats, and dancers moved like shadows, celebrating the ancestors. But Nyera felt a strange heaviness following her, a quiet gloom that pressed against her spirit. And while she tried to ignore it, The moon above witnessed everything with silent judgment, knowing that human envy can twist even the purest hearts, and that this night was only the beginning of Nyera's long battle against the curse woven into her fate. Unaware of the darkness tightening around her destiny, Nyera returned to her hut near the festival grounds, ready to rest for the next morning's ceremonies. While far behind her, beneath the sacred baobab, the buried charm pulsed faintly like a heartbeat in the earth, waiting for its curse to bloom. When morning broke over the festival grounds, and sunlight spilled across the red earth, Nyera rose, feeling an unusual heaviness in her bones, as though the night had drained something essential from her spirit. And when she walked toward the river to wash her face, she noticed in the water's reflection that the glow she was known for, the soft, warm radiance that villagers often compared to sunrise, seemed strangely dim, not gone, but fading like a flame struggling against a sudden wind. Yet she tried to dismiss it as fatigue from the long ceremonies. As she moved through the camp, offering greetings to elders and other performers, several people stared at her with quiet confusion, whispering among themselves that something about her looked different, less vibrant, almost shadowed, and each whisper pricked her heart like a thorn, though she forced a smile and continued with her duties. Meanwhile, beneath the towering baobab tree, where Fumani had buried the curse, the soil pulsed faintly with dark energy, spreading invisible tendrils toward Nyera like creeping roots seeking a life to strangle. And Fumani, who had slept hidden behind one of the clay storage huts, awoke feeling a surge of satisfaction, convinced the spirits had answered her pleas. When Nyera performed her morning ritual dance before the elders, she stumbled, twice a rare occurrence for someone known for perfect balancing, although the elders dismissed it as harmless tiredness. Nyera herself felt a rising panic deep in her chest, because she could sense something was wrong in a way she couldn't explain. The air around her seemed heavier, sounds seemed sharper, and at times she swore the shadows stretched longer than they should, following her too closely as if alive. And worse, she felt her inner confidence waver, replaced by a strange self-doubt she had never known, as though the curse were not only dimming her beauty but also corroding her spirit. Later that day, when she sat with her grandmother under a small acacia tree, the old woman studied her face with narrowed eyes and asked softly, "Child, what burden sits on your shoulders? Your light flickers like a lantern in strong wind." And Nyera, though fearful to speak, confessed that she felt something clinging to her, something cold and unseen that followed her even in crowds. Her grandmother frowned deeply, tracing protective symbols on Nyera's palms and whispering a prayer to the ancestor spirits. But even she sensed an interference in the dark thread woven into Nyera's destiny and warned her, "Granddaughter, to stay close, not wandering alone, for curses thrive when victims are isolated." As the day progressed, small things worsened. When Nyera attempted to braid her hair, the beads slipped from her fingers as though rejecting her touch. When she sang the ceremonial hymn, her voice cracked unexpectedly. And when she tried to greet a group of children, they looked at her with fear, claiming they saw a dark cloud hovering behind her, a cloud that vanished whenever she turned to look. Shaken, Nyera retreated to her hut, knees trembling, struggling to understand how overnight her entire world had shifted, wondering if she had offended the spirits, broken a rule or ignored a warning. But deep in her heart, a whisper of intuition told her this darkness was not born from her actions, it was something placed upon her, something unnatural. At sunset, while the festival drums began again for the second night of ceremonies, Niera felt a chilling breeze swirl around her, even though the air was warm. And suddenly her vision blurred before clearing to reveal a faint, ghost-like figure standing across the fire pit, watching her with hollow eyes before fading into smoke, leaving her shaken and breathless. She fled to her grandmother, who immediately recognized the signs of a curse and declared they must seek help from a respected spirit seer who lived beyond the thorny plains, a woman whose power connected her deeply with the ancestors. But traveling to her would require courage and secrecy, for curses grow stronger when confronted. As night fell, Niera lay awake, her heart pounding not from fear of spirits, but from the cruel realization that someone close had wished her downfall. And though she did not yet know the truth, a part of her heart silently broke as she wondered who among her loved ones carried such deep resentment. Outside, hidden in darkness, Fumani watched Niera's hut with conflicted emotions. Her jealousy satisfied, but her conscience beginning to tremble. For she had not expected the curse to affect Niera so quickly or so painfully. And though she tried to convince herself that Niera deserved to be humbled, a restless guilt churned within her, warning her that what she had unleashed might become far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. At dawn, when the sky turned pale orange and the savanna birds began their soft calls, Niera and her grandmother quietly left the festival grounds, moving swiftly through tall grasses that whispered against their legs like restless spirits guiding their steps. For they knew that the longer the curse remained on Niera, the deeper its roots would grow, and only the spirit seer Mama Kofi, the woman who lived beyond the thorn plains, had the power to unravel darkness woven by spite. Niera walked with a heavy heart, feeling her strength thinning with every mile, as though the curse fed on her hope, draining her brightness the way dry earth drinks the first drops of rain. And worst of all, shadows still clung to her, like invisible vines wrapping around her spirit, tightening whenever she doubted herself. Her grandmother kept a firm hand on her wrist, whispering protective chants under her breath, her voice steady, even though she too sensed the dark weight pressing closer with every step they took away from the festival. Far behind them, hidden by tall shrubs, Fumani followed in secret again, torn between fear of being discovered and worry that the curse she had unleashed was spiraling into something uncontrollable. Yet her jealousy refused to soften, whispering that Niera deserved her suffering. And so she continued stalking them across the plains, determined to witness the outcome of her own treachery. By midday, the harsh sun blazed overhead, turning the earth into shimmering waves of heat, and Niera's feet ached as if stones were tied to her ankles, but she pushed on, determined to reach Mama Kofi before the shadows around her solidified into something irreversible. When they reached the thorn plains, a vast stretch of land covered in jagged, twisting bushes with spines sharp enough to tear flesh, Niera hesitated, for the air felt wrong here, thick with spiritual energy that made her skin prickle. And her grandmother explained in a low voice that the plains acted like a barrier between the mortal world and the realm where spirits whispered freely, meaning curses grew stronger in this place. Each step they took through the maze of thorns felt like walking through a dream, where time slowed and the wind carried whispers that were not their own. And at one point Niera swore she heard her name being called softly from behind her, but when she turned, there was nothing but shifting shadows and the faint silhouette of someone watching from the distance Fumani, though she could not make out her face. As the day faded into evening, they reached Mama Kofi's shrine, a circular hut made of red clay and crowned with feathers, bones, and talismans that fluttered in the wind. And the old spirit seer emerged with eyes clouded by age, yet glowing with ancient knowledge, immediately stopping in her tracks when she saw Niera as if struck by a sudden wave of insight. "You carry a curse heavy enough to break a warrior," Mama Kofi murmured, circling Niera as though examining an invisible aura. "But darker still is the heart that cast it," and Niera shivered, feeling cold fingers brush her spine even though no one had touched her. Mama Kofi led them into her hut, where dried herbs hung from the ceiling and faint blue fire burned in a clay bowl, crackling in a way that felt far too alive. And she instructed Niera to sit before it so the ancestors could reveal the curse's origin. As Niera stared into the blue flames, her vision darkened, and suddenly she found herself standing in a dreamlike field surrounded by swirling shadows. And at the center of those shadows was the outline of a woman she recognized instantly, not by face, but by posture, presence, and the trembling guilt that radiated from her shape. Niera gasped and stumbled backward, tears of confusion and betrayal filling her eyes as the vision dissolved and she snapped back into the hut, where Mama Kofi nodded solemnly, confirming the truth she had feared. Someone close had cursed her out of envy. Niera's heart cracked at the realization, for she had trusted Fumani her entire life, shared meals, stories, and laughter, never imagining such hatred could grow in someone she considered family. Mama Kofi warned that the curse had only begun its work, and that if Niera wanted to survive, she would need to confront the root of envy directly, for no ritual, no herb, no ancestor could fully break a curse fueled by the active hatred of the one who cast it. Outside, hidden behind a boulder, Fumani heard everything, her heart pounding wildly as guilt, fear, and pride collided inside her like battling storms. For she had not expected to be exposed this way, nor imagined the curse would demand a confrontation she felt unprepared to face. Yet fate had already woven their paths into a collision she could no longer avoid. Night settled over Mama Kofi's shrine like a heavy curtain, thick with tension and the electric hum of unseen spirits moving through the darkness. And inside the hut, Niera sat trembling beside the blue flame as she struggled to accept the truth that Fumani, her own cousin, her childhood companion, had been the one to cast the curse meant to dim her beauty, steal her progress, and crush her future. Her grandmother placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, whispering that betrayal from blood is the deepest wound a soul can endure. Yet Niera's heart ached, not with anger, but with a crushing sadness, for she could not understand what she had done to deserve such hatred. Mama Kofi stood in the center of the hut, chanting softly as she sprinkled powdered herbs into the flame, causing it to flare with streaks of green and white. And she warned Niera that the curse would intensify as dawn approached, because curses born from envy grow strongest when the heart that cast them remains unchanged. Outside, hidden among the thorn bushes, Fumani watched the hut with wide, fearful eyes as guilt churned within her like a storm threatening to break. Recalling the moment she buried the dark charm and how anger had blinded her reason. But now the weight of her actions pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. When Mama Kofi announced that the only way to weaken the curse was for Naira to confront Fumani face to face and force her to speak the truth, Fumena's heart nearly stopped, for the spirits would not allow her to hide much longer. When a curse is born from one heart, it always returns, demanding acknowledgement. As the blue flames flickered and threw eerie shapes against the clay walls, Niera finally gathered the strength to stand, her legs weak but her resolve growing, and stepped outside into the night where the wind carried whispers that sounded like warnings, guiding her toward the shadows where Fumani hid. With each step Niara took, the dark aura around her thickened, pulling at her spirit like invisible claws, and she heard faint sobs ahead, soft but familiar, leading her to the boulder where Fumani crouched, trembling. When their eyes met, the world around them seemed to freeze. The wind stopped, crickets fell silent, and even the fire inside the hut crackled differently as the spirits leaned in, hungry to witness the collision of truth and guilt. Niera's voice was soft yet filled with deep pain as she asked, "Why, Fumani? Why would you curse me when I have done nothing but love you?" And her words struck Fumani like a spear, breaking whatever thin shield of denial she still held. Fumani's lips trembled as she confessed everything, how jealousy had eaten her heart, how she felt invisible beside Niara's beauty and progress, how every praise Naira received felt like a wound to her own pride, and how the dark charm had seemed like her only way to reclaim worth. But as she spoke, tears streamed down her face, revealing a soul twisted not by malice alone, but by years of feeling overshadowed. Niera listened with tears of her own, her sorrow heavy, but her anger strangely absent, for she realized that envy is a poison that destroys both the envied and the one who envies, leaving scars on both hearts. Mama Kofi stepped between them, her presence radiating ancient authority, and declared that the spirits demanded balance. Fumani must willingly undo the curse by admitting her wrongdoing, not only to Niera, but to the ancestors, for only truth spoken from genuine remorse could break the bind she had created. Trembling, Fumani dropped to her knees, pressing her forehead against the earth, whispering apologies to Niera and begging the ancestors for forgiveness. And as her voice rose in raw sincerity, the air around her shifted as, though the spirits leaned closer, a faint glow began to pulse in the soil beneath her, the first sign that the curse was weakening. Niera knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shaking shoulder, her heart aching but open, knowing that forgiveness would not erase the betrayal, but would free both of them from the darkness, tightening around their destinies. The wind picked up softly, carrying away the heavy tension and replacing it with the scent of rain, a sign of cleansing, and Mama Kofi nodded solemnly, announcing that the spirits had accepted Fumani's remorse, but warned that the curse was not fully broken yet. They would need to perform one final ritual at sunrise, when shadows retreat and truth stands strongest, or the curse would root itself once more. As the three of them walked back toward the shrine, Niara felt a faint warmth return to her body, the first hint of her fading glow stirring again, though the night was far from over. Hope flickered inside her like a flame refusing to die. As the first pale light of dawn began to stretch across the savannah, painting the grasses with soft gold and orange hues, Naira and Mama Kofi stood in a small clearing surrounded by ancient stones engraved with ancestral symbols, the air thick with anticipation and the faint scent of burning sage and herbs. For this was the moment when the curse could finally be broken if the ritual was performed correctly and the truth of Fumani's heart was fully acknowledged. Naira's body still felt the remnants of the dark energy, a heavy weight that pressed on her chest and made each breath feel like a labor, yet she stood tall, her eyes focused on the horizon where the sun's first rays ignited the sky, believing that the strength of her spirit could resist the lingering shadows. Fumani, trembling, knelt beside her cousin, with tears still streaking her face, muttering apologies to both Naira and the ancestors, repeating the words that Mama Kofi had taught her, words of truth, remorse, and release, acknowledging every ounce of envy that had poisoned her heart and every step she had taken to harm Naira. For the spirits required not just confession, but genuine surrender, and the slightest hesitation could allow the curse to take root again. Mama Kofi moved in a steady circle around them, sprinkling powders of crushed roots, dried flowers, and sacred ash, chanting in a language older than the village itself, her voice rising and falling like the rhythm of a distant drum, while the wind answered with a whisper through the trees, carrying their voices across the plains and stirring the energy that lingered from the curse, drawing it out from the shadows, compelling it to reveal itself. As the sun crested the horizon, a golden shaft of light fell upon Naira's face, and she felt the first real warmth in days, as though her inner light was stirring after being trapped under layers of darkness. And at that exact moment, the faint shadow of the curse began to rise from the soil where Fumani had buried the charm, twisting and writhing like smoke caught in sunlight, yet unable to harm her because the acknowledgement and remorse were strong, because truth and courage had begun to cut through the darkness. Fumani, shaking violently, reached out and picked up a small bowl filled with water, blessed by Mama Kofi, and she poured it over the ground where the charm had been buried, speaking words that called for forgiveness, release, and healing. And the shadows recoiled, twisting into a thin, smoke-like spiral before vanishing entirely into the morning air, leaving behind a faint shimmer that suggested the ancestors had accepted her plea. Naira collapsed onto the earth briefly, overwhelmed with relief, feeling the weight that had pressed her down for so long lift from her chest, and for the first time in days, she could see her reflection in the small pool of water as it shimmered, her glow returning, brighter and warmer than before, a visible testament that the curse had been undone. Mama Kofi smiled faintly, her eyes full of wisdom, warning them both that envy, though broken today, can return if hearts are not tended carefully, and that forgiveness is a daily practice, not a single act. And while the wind carried away the last whispers of the dark charm, Naira extended her hand to Fumani, who took it with trembling fingers, their connection fragile but mending, as if the ancestors themselves had guided them to this reconciliation. The sky turned a full brilliant gold as the sun rose high, the savannah alive with birds singing in celebration, and Naira, feeling her body strong and her spirit restored, realized that her journey was not just about defeating the curse, but about learning the power of resilience, the necessity of truth, and the extraordinary strength that comes from forgiving even those who have sought to harm you most. Behind them, Mama Kofi began preparations to bless the village with protective charms, her chants carrying across the plains like a lullaby to spirits, while Naira and Fumani walked back together, cautious but united, the bond between them fragile yet renewed, a quiet promise that beauty and progress are gifts to be cherished but never taken for granted. For envy lies in wait even in the hearts of those closest to us, and only courage, honesty, and love can guard against it. With the curse finally lifted and the golden light of the rising sun bathing the savannah in warmth, Niera felt a strength and clarity in her spirit that she had not known before, as if the long shadows that had clung to her for days were now dispersed by the gentle hand of the ancestors. And though her body still tingled from the lingering remnants of dark energy, her heart was lighter, her mind sharper, and her very presence seemed to radiate the soft glow that had first drawn admiration and awe from her village. Fumani walked beside her, her steps hesitant but genuine, and though the guilt of her past actions lingered like a quiet ache, she understood now that true growth required not just remorse but consistent effort to act with kindness and integrity, and she silently vowed to protect, not harm, the cousin she had once envied, recognizing that Naira's beauty and progress were never a threat. Together they returned to the village, where elders and villagers awaited news, and as Naira stepped into the familiar compound, faces turned toward her, eyes wide with wonder. For even after the darkness she had endured, her light seemed brighter than ever, a brilliance tempered by the trials she had survived and strengthened by the courage that she had summoned to face betrayal and fear alike. Children ran to greet her, laughing and clapping. Elders nodded with approving smiles, and women whispered blessings, as though sensing that Naira's spirit now carried the essence of both sunrise and resilience, embodying wisdom beyond her years. Mama Kofi followed behind, her staff tapping lightly against the ground, murmuring that the ancestors were pleased and that Niara's journey had become a tale that would be told for generations, one that carried lessons about the danger of envy, the power of truth, and the transformative force of forgiveness. And as Naira absorbed her words, she realized that her story was no longer hers alone, but belonged to the entire village, inspiring all who had witnessed her trials and triumphs. Fumani approached quietly, kneeling before Niera and offering her hands, a gesture of humility and reconciliation, and Naira accepted, feeling a warmth of compassion that replaced lingering anger, for she knew that holding on to resentment would only allow shadows to return, and that embracing forgiveness was the true path to freedom and lasting light. Over the following days, the village celebrated not only the Festival of Masks, but also Naira's restored glow, a living symbol of the balance between human vulnerability and strength. And though the echoes of envy would forever linger in memory, the story of the cousins, the curse, and the dawn ritual became a beacon for all who feared betrayal or darkness within themselves, reminding everyone that even in the face of envy and malice, courage, honesty, and love could restore what was nearly lost. Naira walked through the market, helping the children, speaking with elders, and sharing laughter with Fumani, each interaction strengthening the renewed bond between them. And she found that true beauty was not merely in her radiant appearance, but in the resilience of her heart, the clarity of her mind, and the depth of her compassion. At night, as she looked up at the stars stretching across the African sky, she whispered a quiet thanks to the spirits, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her and the presence of ancestors guiding her path. Knowing that she had survived envy, emerged stronger, and learned that progress, like the sun, must be honored and shared, not hoarded, and that light, once restored, can shine brighter than ever, illuminating not just oneself, but all who walk beside it. And with that, Naira finally smiled fully, a serene glow radiating from her as the village slept peacefully around her. Safe in the knowledge that the darkness had passed, lessons were learned, and the power of love and forgiveness would carry forward across generations.